Ever wonder how those amazing tech products, we can't live without actually make it big? You know, the ones that go from a cool idea to something everyone's using?
It's a fascinating journey,
Oh,
right?
really? And today, we're taking a deep dive into a classic book that tries to explain just that. Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. It's practically a must-read for anyone in tech. So we're
Absolutely.
going to break it down and see what insights we can glean.
Sounds good. I'm ready when you are.
Awesome. So, Crossing the Chasm, just the title, I have to admit, when I first heard it, I pictured like covered wagons or something trying to get across this huge canyon.
Well, the book does use this dramatic analogy,
Yeah.
and it's not that far off, honestly. The
Mm.
chasm Moore talks about, it's this gap that exists between early adopters,
Mm.
the people who love trying new things, and then the mainstream market.
Oh, so that's what he means.
Yeah, that's the chasm. And for a lot of tech companies, this gap, it's a real make or break moment.
I see. So, like, early adopters are the ones who'll wait in line for the new iPhone, no matter what.
Exactly. They're always searching for that next big thing.
Right, right.
But the early majority, they're more cautious. They want to see that something actually works before they invest their time and money.
That makes sense. So, how do companies even bridge that gap? Like, can you actually appeal to both those groups at the same time? Or is that even the goal?
That is the big question.
And I know Moore talks about this D-Day analogy, but before we get into all the specifics, I'm curious, can you give me a real-world example of a company that really nailed this whole chasm crossing thing?
Let's see. Oh, how about Salesforce.com?
Oh, okay.
They really shook things up in the software world with their cloud platform, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't try to conquer everything at once.
So they were strategic.
Very.
Yeah.
Their beachhead, so to speak, was the sales department. They built a product specifically for salespeople, made it user-friendly, and kept it affordable.
Smart. So they picked a battle they could win and then went from there. Got it.
Hmm.
But I'm guessing there's more to it than just choosing the right battlefield, right? There's got to be more.
Oh, definitely. Moore talks about this idea of the whole product. And it's not just about having, like, a cool gadget. It's more than that. Imagine you're buying a new smartphone.
All right.
The generic product is the phone itself. But then you expect certain things to come with it.
Like a charger.
Yes. Charger, operating system, maybe headphones, the basics.
Right, the stuff you need to actually use the phone.
Exactly. The expected product.
Yeah.
But then there's this augmented product. This could be premium support, cloud storage, those extras.
Okay.
And finally, there's the potential product, the future stuff. Maybe AI features we haven't even dreamed up yet.
Wow.
So the whole product is about hitting all those levels of needs.
I get it. But how do companies even figure out what that whole product should be? I mean, it seems like it could get really complex.
It can be. Yeah. And that's where something called target customer scenarios comes in. Moore uses a 3D printer as an example. So instead of just saying, hey, we're selling this to everyone, you create specific scenarios. Like, okay, picture an architect using the printer for models.
Makes sense.
Then you imagine, I don't know, a dentist using it to make implants. You explore these scenarios.
So you can really pinpoint the target customer's needs.
Yeah, and figure out the features they'd actually find valuable at each level. It's about going deep.
That's cool. So all that said, are there any common mistakes that companies make when they're trying to cross this chasm? Because it can't always be a success story, right?
Oh, absolutely not. One of the biggest mistakes is being too focused on those early adopters.
Really?
Yeah, because remember, early adopters aren't the average person. They love the newness, even if something's not perfect yet. Companies can get kind of seduced by that early enthusiasm.
So it's like, oh, we've got something great here, but...
Exactly. But those early adopters, they're not the whole market.
Right.
The early majority, the folks you need to win over to actually cross that chasm, they're different.
So basically, don't get too caught up in the hype.
Yeah, the early majority, they're looking for something reliable, easy to use. They just want their problem solved.
Makes sense. So what other pitfalls should companies try to avoid? I feel like there's got to be more to it than just that.
Well, there's also the trap of trying to be everything to everyone.
Ah, I see.
Instead of focusing on a specific niche market, some companies, they try to chase every single sale.
Which probably stretches them too thin.
Exactly. It spreads their resources too thin, and their message gets diluted.
Diluted? How so?
Well, Moore uses this great analogy. It's like starting a bunch of small fires that fizzle out quickly instead of focusing on one big fire that can really,
Take hold.
yeah, take hold.
So it's about quality over quantity. You pick your beachhead, you conquer it, and then you move on.
Precisely. Dominate that niche and then think about expanding.
Okay, so we've got the D-Day strategy, we've got the whole product concept, and we've got focusing on that niche market. But what about competition? At some point, you've got to figure out who you're up against, right?
Oh, absolutely. Defining your competition is crucial, but it might not be who you initially think.
Oh, how so?
Well, Morpole introduces this idea of, get this, creating the competition.
Creating your own rivals, what does that even mean?
Well, not literally creating them from scratch, but it's more about strategically positioning your product to show why you're the better choice.
Give me an example.
Say you're a new cloud storage company.
Okay.
You could position yourself as the more secure, enterprise-grade alternative to, let's say, Dropbox.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, highlighting your security features, your integrations, that kind of thing. Or you could point to the success of Salesforce, another cloud platform that's killing it in the enterprise world. You're essentially saying, hey, we're like them, but better.
So it's like leveraging a familiar reference point and then showing how you stand out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a lot smarter than just yelling about how great you are in a crowded marketplace.
That's for sure.
And sometimes you might even have to create that reference point yourself. Like find a successful product using similar tech, but in a different market.
Interesting.
Because it shows that your approach actually works. It builds trust, especially with those pragmatic buyers we were talking about earlier.
It's like borrowing credibility.
You could say that,
Yeah.
and it can be incredibly effective. It's almost like you're telling a story.
Yeah.
You start with something familiar to get people hooked, and then you introduce your own unique twist. But creating that competition, it's just one piece of the puzzle. There's also positioning, how you present your product to the world.
Oh, positioning. I've heard that term thrown around a lot in marketing, but it always seemed kind of vague to me. What is it exactly? Is it just about having like a catchy slogan?
Oh, it's way more than a slogan.
Yeah.
Think of it as crafting a message that really clicks with your target customer, one that speaks directly to their needs. And remember, we're trying to win over those pragmatists.
Right, the ones who need convincing.
Yeah, they want proof. They want facts.
Okay.
They want to know that your product is the answer to their specific problems.
So how do you do that? What makes a message truly convincing, especially to those skeptical pragmatists?
Moore breaks it down into 4 stages. First, you got to nail your product's identity. Give it a name that captures what it's all about, and a frame, a category that people instantly understand. Like, think about Tesla.
Okay, yeah.
The name itself, it sounds innovative, luxurious.
Right.
And they've positioned themselves as the future of electric vehicles.
But a name alone isn't enough, right? You have to explain why it matters.
Exactly. So the next stage is all about answering those who for and what for questions. You got to be crystal clear about who your ideal customer is and how your product makes their lives better, solves their problems.
So it's not just about listing features, it's about the benefits.
Exactly. Instead of saying, our software has AI-powered analytics, you say something like, our software helps you find your most profitable customers and predicts future trends.
It's about painting that picture of how it actually makes a difference.
You got it. Then comes the differentiation part. What makes you stand out from the competition? You got to back up your claims with evidence. Now, with early adopters, you might get away with demos and tech specs, but to win over those pragmatists, you need more.
Like hard proof.
Yeah, think customer testimonials, case studies, those kinds of things.
Okay.
Even market share data, industry reports. Pragmatists, they want to see that your product's already working for others, that it's a safe bet, not some risky experiment.
Makes sense. So we've covered positioning, but what about the practical stuff like distribution and pricing? You could have an amazing product, but if people can't buy it easily or if it's too expensive, it doesn't matter, right?
You're absolutely right. Distribution and pricing, they're critical pieces of the puzzle, and they go hand in hand. Choosing the right channels to reach your market is key, and it really depends on who your customer is and your pricing strategy.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all. Moore actually outlines 5 main types of customers, each with their own preferences. You've got enterprise buyers. They're looking for those complex solutions. They value relationships.
Right.
Then there are end-user buyers. Those folks are all about convenience, self-service options.
I see.
And then there are OEMs. They want to integrate stuff into their own products.
Okay.
Small business owners, they need affordability and support. And of course, they're consumers. They want something easy to use and widely available.
So many different types of buyers.
Yeah, so you might go with the direct sales force, online channels, retail partnerships, or even mix and match. It all depends.
Got it. And what about pricing? What's the best approach when you're in that chasm crossing phase?
Well, this might surprise you, but during that crucial time, The main goal is motivating your channel partners, not just pleasing customers or investors,
Really? Why prioritize partners?
because they're the ones who will be selling your product to that wider market. If they aren't excited about your pricing structure, they won't champion your product or go the extra mile to overcome any initial resistance.
So it's about incentivizing them.
Exactly. You might even offer higher margins early on to make it worth their while. It's a strategic investment in their success and yours.
That makes sense. So we're seeing how Crossing the Chasm, it's not a one-time event, it's a process. So what happens after you've successfully reached that mainstream market? What does the landscape look like then?
That's a great question. Crossing the chasm, it's just the beginning. It marks a big shift, not only in your market position, but also in how you operate as a company.
In what way?
Well, you're moving from a world of early adopters who are more forgiving, they're willing to overlook those rough edges, to a world of pragmatists who demand reliability and results.
And I bet that shift impacts the whole organization, not just the product itself.
Absolutely. It affects everything, from your finances and structure to how you approach R&D. Like with finances, in the early stages, you're all about getting investors and proving your concept.
Right.
But once you've crossed the chasm, you got to focus on profitability and sustainable growth. Those hockey stick projections that get investors excited early on, they won't cut it anymore.
So you need to show you can make money consistently.
Yeah, you got to prove you're a viable business, not just a promising idea. And that means making tough choices sometimes.
But what kinds of choices?
Well, Moore warns against chasing every single sale, especially if it means losing money. It's about building a strong foundation in your target market, even if you have to say no to certain opportunities. It's like building a house. You need a solid foundation before adding those extra rooms.
So strategic restraint is key. What about company culture? How does that need to change post-chasm?
Crossing the chasm requires shifting from what Moore calls a pioneer culture to a settler culture.
Okay, I like that analogy. So early on, you need those creative, adaptable risk takers, those pioneers.
Yeah, the explorers.
I bet.
But in the mainstream market, you need people who are more process-oriented, disciplined, focused on execution. They're the settlers who build those towns and establish infrastructure.
You need both types, but their roles change.
Right. And some of those early pioneers, they might not be the best fit for this new phase.
I guess that's natural.
It's not about getting rid of anyone. It's just recognizing that different skills are needed now. Some folks might move into new roles. Others might move on to different ventures. It's evolution.
Makes sense. And what about research and development? How does that change after crossing the chasm?
Early on, R&D is all about getting that core product ready for market. But once you've got a foothold, you got to shift gears and start thinking about that whole product we discussed earlier.
So investing in things like documentation, training, support, all those things that make the customer experience better.
Exactly. It also means working closely with your partners to make sure your product integrates well with their solutions. Yeah, and maybe most importantly, it means listening to your customers, taking their feedback seriously.
So R&D is less about chasing the next shiny object and more about refining what you've already built.
You got it. Moore calls this whole product R&D. The product isn't just the thing in the box, it's the whole experience.
And that requires collaboration, right? Between engineering, marketing, customer support. Everyone's got to be on the same page.
Absolutely. Success in the mainstream market, it's a team effort.
Everything we've talked about so far has focused on those business-to-business tech markets. But what about consumer tech? Are the rules different when you're trying to reach millions of everyday users?
That's a great point. Moore does address the unique challenges of consumer tech adoption.
Oh, he does.
Yeah, he says a lot of the principles are the same, but there are some key differences in how consumer tech companies need to approach that chasm crossing.
Like what? And I'm curious how consumer tech is different.
One big difference is the emphasis on rapid growth, building a massive user base, sometimes even before they make much money.
Okay, yeah.
Think about companies like Facebook or Spotify. They offered their services for free at first. It was all about getting people to use their product.
So it's like, get big fast and then figure out how to make money later.
Exactly. And that requires a different mindset. Consumer tech companies, they're often less worried about profit margins in those early stages. They're more focused on engagement, user growth, market share, things like that.
So how do they measure success if it's not just about profits?
Well, Moore talks about these 4 gears of online adoption for consumer tech. First, you got to acquire traffic. Get people to know about your product.
Good.
Then you got to engage those users, get them using your product regularly.
Right, right.
Next, you figure out how to monetize that engagement, whether it's through ads, subscriptions, or in-app purchases.
So you build the audience, then you figure out the revenue.
Yeah, but maybe the most important gear, and one that's often overlooked, is enlisting the faithful. This is about turning your most loyal users into advocates.
Turning them into fans who spread the word.
Exactly. Word-of-mouth marketing is super powerful, especially for consumer products.
It's like creating a movement.
You could say that. So even though the strategies might be different, those core principles, understanding your customer, building the whole product, choosing the right channels, those are still crucial for consumer tech.
Absolutely. Whether you're selling software to businesses or the latest gadget to consumers, crossing that chasm, it demands a deep understanding of your market and a willingness to adapt to those unique challenges.
So crossing the chasm, it sounds like it's a really dynamic process. It's not like you just reach the mainstream market and you're done.
You're exactly right. It's an ongoing thing. Companies need to adapt and evolve.
Otherwise, they get stuck.
They can become a victim of their own success. Moore talks about this, the importance of having a culture of continuous improvement.
So you can't just rest on your laurels, even when things are going well.
Nope. You got to keep pushing. Encourage experimentation.
So even after you've crossed the chasm, you can't stop innovating. Exactly. You got to stay ahead of the curve. Empower your employees to challenge the status quo, come up with new ideas.
And be okay with taking risks.
Calculated risks, yeah. And that means creating an environment where it's okay to fail sometimes.
Because not every idea is going to be a winner, right?
Right. But those experiments, even the ones that don't work out, they can lead to breakthroughs.
It's all part of the process. Thinking back to those consumer tech examples, the ones that really took off, it seems like they all had this strong community around them.
That's a good point. It's like their users were part of the innovation process.
Exactly.
And Moore talks about this too. It's about staying connected to your customers, no matter how big you get.
Because ultimately, they're the ones who decide if you're successful or not, right?
They are.
It's not enough to just make a great product. You got to keep listening, keep improving, make sure you're still solving the problems that matter.
You got to have that dialogue.
Yeah, a two-way street. You're not just selling them something. You're inviting them to be part of the journey.
Well said.
This has been so insightful. I'm already thinking about how I can apply these concepts to my own work.
That's great. And it's not just limited to the tech world either.
Right. Crossing the Chasm is a framework that applies to any kind of innovation.
Any new idea you're trying to bring to the world.
Exactly. So before we wrap up, let's recap those key takeaways. First, we've got understanding the technology adoption life cycle, knowing that not all customers are the same.
Then there's the D-Day strategy, picking your niche, building that whole product.
Choosing your competition, positioning your product strategically through messaging and partnerships.
Having the right distribution and pricing to actually reach your target market.
And remembering that crossing the chasm, it's just the start. You have to adapt, evolve your company culture, and keep innovating.
And never forget to listen to your customers.
They're at the heart of it all. So, to close out our deep dive into crossing the chasm, here's a question for you to think about. What's a technology you use every day? Was it an immediate success, or did it struggle to cross the chasm? What do you think were the key factors that led to its success? Or, if it failed, why do you think that happened?
And if you're working on something new and innovative, think about how you can apply these ideas from the book to navigate your own journey.
This deep dive has just scratched the surface of what Crossing the Chasm has to offer. If you're intrigued, I highly recommend checking out the book yourself. It's a fascinating read. Happy reading.